Are you losing out on millions of dollars by not investing in oil and gas? Or have you already lost $1 million by investing in the wrong oil and gas projects? In this video, I'm going to go through those exact things so you understand more about the industry itself, what and when type of oil and gas investments to look into, and ultimately seeing, is this the right type of investment for me? Now, I will give a disclaimer that ultimately any type of investment depends. Just because it's a fit for someone does not mean it's a fit for you. And so really this is more an educational piece, really highlighting the overall industry, some of the type of returns and aspects and things that you could receive. And there's more details that I ultimately put into an ebook that I created about investing in oil and gas, but truly the best way to actually know if oil and gas investing is the best thing for you from a tax strategy side, from an investment side, or potentially both. For context, this is coming from someone who ultimately has spent over 5 years in the oil and gas asset advisory space, meaning that we've worked with different oil and gas syndicators. Let's go ahead and dive into these specific topics so that you can walk away from this video understanding who to connect with or work with. I work with entrepreneurs and high income individuals on allocating to things like oil and gas. So happy to chat with you to see to what extent it's actually a fit for you. What I typically see is that individuals who have experience with real estate tend to also want to invest in oil and gas. There's similar reasons why in terms of how it's structured, how it feels, what it sort of looks like, etc. So what actually is investing in oil and gas? Now, there's several different types of investments that you can make, and some of these I will go through in terms of the typical ones. I have specific calls with individuals if they're looking for tax strategy, as well as they're looking for larger placements. Now, an individual investor is going to be a retail investor. This is traditionally going to be someone who is considered accredited, meaning that they have $1 million plus net worth, excluding their primary residence, or they're making $200,000 an individual or $300,000 as a married couple for annual income. And that's projected to be the same in continuous years. In some cases, you can be what's called a sophisticated investor, meaning you're not yet accredited, but ultimately you could share of how you are just familiar with investments and could then do a type of investment. Now, those are going to be different types, right? But the main thing I want to take away in this section on the what is simply to say where your income needs to be, either accredited or non-accredited or even sophisticated, right? And you have experience with different investments. And really finding companies that fit where you're at. Typically, all minimums are going to be $50,000 towards investment. Less than $50,000, truly, I don't know why that would be. And frankly, I'd be concerned. We're not going to go through the concerns ultimately that you can facilitate or see or experience that I've learned and known, as well as have worked with others as well on how to evaluate risk. There's a separate documented sheet I have, for that. But ultimately, we'll just go in the detail of oil and gas today. So why oil and gas? You've probably heard about it from some people, maybe that wealthy friend. Maybe you are the wealthy friend who is curious about doing it yourself. Big thing to think about is market outlook. As we look from 2025 to 2028, there's a massive gap in energy investment and ultimately trillions needed to close that gap. That's also considering the AI technology energy need. One thing I'll say here very directly is simply that just because the energy pie might change in terms of how much, say, oil and gas is going to be used, does not mean it's going away. I know several individuals who are developing AI data centers and either constructing or preparing to construct, and they're looking at certain locations that are around oil and gas sort of epicenters because of this reason. Analysts over the next couple of years are seeing a price from about $70 to $95 a barrel, and that's really just going to be the new normal as we continue into that. Now we're going to get to how to invest in oil and gas. And some of this, again, is going to be nuanced. And I'm not going to go into as much detail as I would like to, because ultimately I don't know the specifics of what you're looking for, what you have access to in terms of overall net worth, as well as disposable cash, and ultimately the tax liability that you have. Sometimes people keep investing in oil and gas and they realize that they're over leveraged within oil and gas, but they may not have a wealth manager who has the actual experience of working with alternative investments like myself to then figure out other opportunities that you can invest in. Oil and gas ultimately is kind of a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning for every, say, $100,000 that you invest, you would typically be able to offset about that same amount. Now, traditionally, it's actually a little bit less. It could be anywhere from 70% to 90%. There are opportunities to do leverage offsetting. For example, film credits, heavy equipment, and a couple other strategies that we use internally for family offices for our clients. I'm not going to talk about those here, but I just wanted to share that typically people go and consistently do oil and gas investments, realizing that they could have better offsetting for tax strategy without as much capital being deployed, which is beneficial, especially if you're a business owner or a real estate individual. You probably want to buy or grow some of those things more than you do want to have a larger portion in an oil and gas investment. Now, there's different types of investments you can make within oil and gas. There's mineral rights and kind of royalties. So those are really kind of cash flow, no tax benefits there. We then have proven drilling. So these are wells that are existing, that have already been drilled and are operating. They then were purchased and ultimately are typically being improved. And then lastly, we have wildcatting, which is just wild, wild west, moonshot. Hey, let's poke a hole in the ground, if you will, and see if there is any oil. Now, there's certainly high returns with that. However, there is extremely difficult risk. And so ultimately, if you have a single well that is very different than a lease or a portfolio of wells, so also keep that in mind in terms of what you're actually investing in so that you're not caught on your heels, because that would ultimately be not a good type of underwriting and evaluation of what you wanted to invest in or thought you were going to invest in. Now, there's a number of different critical due diligence questions that I have learned to ask and do ask as behalf of clients. Again, those are really going to depend. You do want to ensure that you understand the financials, the actual type of oil and gas investment that you're making, ensuring that it's aligning with your goals, both short-term and long-term, understanding the tax strategy implications, as well as the overall structure of the company and just the simply operations of the company. Oil and gas works with tax strategy because of what are called intangible drilling costs. This ultimately allows for an immediate tax deduction up to, again, that 100%, although statistically I've really seen the best ones at about 90% of really good solid operators that could do anywhere from 15 to 30% annualized returns. Again, my background and experience of having these 5+ years makes this super unique for myself. So I'm not sure what others really have in terms of knowledge, but I oftentimes get asked, and I wanted to make this video for either the investor or even the financial provider or even the CPA as well. I talk to a lot of CPAs on oil and gas investing and ultimately kind of coach them. We have that as an offer within our company to work with financial professionals on helping them understand, but more importantly, implement and categorize which types of investments are best for their clients. As we think about tax strategy for oil and gas, ultimately is depletion allowance. So you do get 15% of the production income year over year for the life of the well. That first 15% comes tax-free. Kind of cool. Not that big of a value add, but certainly a benefit nonetheless. And in some cases, you are able to 1031 exchange into an oil and gas opportunity, but there's a lot of different sort of nuances there that I won't go into specific detail on, and really just need to ensure that you are doing the right due diligence for that. Now, as we look at the details of investing in oil and gas for tax strategy, let's do this. Let's say that we were going to invest $143,000 into an oil and gas investment that, again, we've done the due diligence on ourselves, as well as have worked with a wealth manager. If you don't have a wealth manager, again, I would at least suggest or have a third-party review. You spending a couple $1,000s of someone analyzing and reviewing it as a third party can save you tens of hundreds of $1,000s and headache on the back end. I've seen people be completely wiped out in some cases, not just in oil and gas, but in other alternative investments. So it's important that you put your money in a safe haven with the type of due diligence that would be beneficial to align with the type of investment that you're looking to make. So with a $143,000 investment, assuming an 80% intangible drilling cost, that would ultimately be a $114,400 deduction at a 39% tax bracket. That's basically a $44,600 in immediate tax savings. Now, it's important to keep in mind that year two, with the cash flow, you'd ultimately making more income. So some challenge I see is that people invest in something initially, have the cash flow, and then basically don't have a plan. So they keep just reinvesting and basically causing more tax issues. So that's something that my team specifically works on, is what is really that long-term tax strategy, because we have the experience of, I own a couple short-term rentals. I've done the oil and gas asset advisory and have a really good understanding of that. I've been in and around the family office space, so I understand what a 200 million or 20 million, even the $2 million type of entrepreneur is ultimately looking or thinking about investing, and really what their end goals would be, could be, and then really backdating that to see, hey, what the tax strategy is with current income, projected future income, risk tolerance, investment strategy and investment thesis, and ultimately allocation to different investments that really align with them. Keep in mind, if you're familiar with the short-term rental loophole, you do need to have what's called material participation, meaning to offset W-2 active income, you do need to material participate, meaning that you're doing at least 100 hours or over 500, you're doing more than any other person to then be considered active to then offset active income, meaning your high W-2 corporate role, or potentially you as a business owner. Now, with oil and gas, you are able to offset active income and therefore be able to not spend the time that you would have with short-term rental. Plus, there's just a lot of headache. There's also a lot of amazing things within short-term rentals. I'm navigating away towards short-term rentals for a number of reasons, personally, as an investor, and then ultimately as a fiduciary responsibility to clients. Instead of just investing in things that they, met someone at a meetup event or they heard about it online, really hunkering down to, out of all the things, what can we prioritize to say, if we did this over an extended amount of time, it would be more likely to get to where our goals are. Very different conversation, very different outcome. It's really important that you get educated about oil and gas. There tends to be a lot of big jargon and detail and graphs and charts, even more, right, than real estate. So you really want to ensure that you have that understanding, or you're working with a third party, unbiased professional who's then able to guide you, either someone who's analyzing the deal on your behalf, who has that oil and gas experience, or again, a wealth manager who specifically has experience within oil and gas, and they know of different options. They aren't just given one option from their firm. That tends to be a huge issue I see, is they're like, oh, I learned about this and it's been underwritten by our company, and it could be absolute garbage trash. The last thing that I'll ultimately leave you with, I do have a guide for oil and gas investing that goes through this a little bit more. What I tend to find is that people get analysis paralysis, or even just don't have the time to actually follow up with the ebook. So what I'd recommend as well is potentially just scheduling a call with me. Happy to go through some of the details and really say, hey, based on what you told me and where you're going, a recommendation could be to explore this. Sometimes that does involve a deeper dive into your finances. Sometimes it doesn't, because maybe you just have kind of a simple question. But certainly, if I can help from my experience, either directly as an investor or even being an independent investment advisor, working with the family offices anywhere from 2 to 200 million plus, certainly would love to help you out in any way that I can. Check with your CPA, not in terms of if they have deals, because I've seen there's more exploration that CPAs need to do in terms of learning about the industry. But I have seen instances and have talked to a couple CPAs specifically that don't know about IDCs or don't have experience within oil and gas. So they actually are resistant to it. So if you need a new CPA who ultimately understands oil and gas or other different complex investments, also connect with me, and happy to share, some of those resources as well. I hope this has been helpful for you to understand more about oil and gas, its benefits, advantages, and potential for you to invest in, either as an investment or the investment as a tax strategy. Thanks for watching, and check out some of the other things I've made too to help you on your investment journey.